Mormon fundamentalists are those people who believe in and they follow and practice the fundamentalist teachings of Joseph Smith from early Mormonism, and that includes polygamy. We wonder why the Mormons hate that word, and we get chastised all the time for mentioning that it is Mormon fundamentalist, and it is, because Joseph Smith is the first Mormon and he started it. There are many different polygamy groups in the United States and also in Canada, and probably the best, most well-known of all of the groups are the FLDS. Now, many people will use FLDS as a generic term for all polygamists, and that is incorrect because each group has a different name. The FLDS right now is probably the most well-known because of what's going on with Warren Jeffs, but they have communities in El Dorado, Texas, in Pringle, South Dakota, in Hilldale, Utah, in Colorado City, Arizona. They also have communities in the state of Colorado and Nevada and California, and pockets of families virtually all over the United States. They also have an LDS communities up in over across our northern border in Canada. Tonight we have the opportunity to interview a researcher who is here from Canada. She's doing research on polygamy, and since she's only going to be here for a few days, I called her and asked her if she'd like to be a guest on the show and share some of her research with us, and she so graciously agreed on such short notice. She's a working psychologist with a master's degree, and she's finishing her doctorate in counseling psychology at the University of Calgary in Calgary, Canada. She's employed as an individual and career counselor at SAIT Technical College. I would like to introduce to our viewers and welcome to our show, Terri Scoville.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming.
It's great to be here.
It's great to have you, and you've got some wonderful information. We had a chat yesterday, so she's got some good information to share. So we'll just get right into what she's doing about your research. You have chosen to do a research project for your thesis, and you chose polygamy. Would you tell our viewers what you want to accomplish in your research with this and why you're doing it?
Okay. Well, first and foremost, when one completes a doctorate degree in anything, you have to write a paper, basically a book. And so in the PhD program at the University of Calgary in counseling psychology, you can choose any topic that relates to something that you're interested in. And so first and foremost, I had to write a dissertation to complete my PhD, and this is the last step to finish it, is to finish this document.
Great.
And secondly, probably one of the overarching things is that all of my research and all of my interests have literally been in the area of women's issues, particularly women who are marginalized. And so that's always been a part of my entire, now going on 14 years of education.
Wow.
And when I started thinking about 5 years ago about what will that dissertation topic be about, it was in 2005 when the government of Canada started asking people to do research about polygamy because they didn't have enough information, and Canada had just passed a law which allowed marriage. The marriage laws had been changed, and so same-sex marriages had become legal in Canada. And they were under the impression and the belief, and perhaps some under the fear, that polygamists would take our Charter of Rights and take that freedom of religion clause that's in there and challenge the Charter of Rights and say that polygamy should be, the freedom of religion includes polygamy. So they didn't have enough research, so they asked people to research. And I thought, well, that strikes me right at home, because I have polygamy in my background as I grew up.
And is that why you chose polygamy for your paper?
It's one of the reasons. One of the reasons.
Well, tell us a little bit about your background. Tell us about your great-great-grandfather.
Well, okay, so polygamy touches me through my great-great-grandfather. He was actually born in Massachusetts and in the early 1840s, arrived in Nauvoo and was a bodyguard of the prophet Joseph Smith. And he served several missions, and and the polygamy part is he had 5 wives. And he is a very revered man in our family. And I always had questions about, I would ask different people, well, what about the polygamy part? You know, like how many wives did he have? And I just never knew the information. That wasn't really forthcoming in my family. Yes, we knew he was a bodyguard. Yes, we knew he was faithful. But the conversation sort of petered out after that.
Really? Did he have journals or anything that you could give some details of his experiences?
Well, anyone who's been to Nauvoo, Illinois, will find that there is a Scoville bakery there, and it's the bakery that my great-great-grandfather established, and it has been restored. And and I actually went to Nauvoo a year ago just to because I wanted to visit the birthplace of polygamy. It wasn't the birthplace of my great-grandfather, because my great-grandfather wasn't born until they had moved across the plains. He was born in Springville, Utah.
Okay. So they came west with Brigham Young.
They came west with Brigham Young.
Okay.
He was the only polygamist. His name was Lucius Nelson Scoville, spelled slightly different than my name.
So your great-grandfather...
Great-great-grandfather.
was the only polygamist. Your great-grandfather and your grandfather were not then?
Not.
Oh, I see.
They were not.
I wonder why they weren't. That's interesting.
Yeah, and I don't know that part of my story.
Yeah.
Certainly my own grandfather, I never ever spoke about it. So I have no records there.
I wonder if something happened with your great-great-grandfather's story that would have stopped the rest of them from doing it. In case some of our viewers may not be aware of what's going on in Canada right now, currently as we speak, with the polygamy issue. They're a little bit further ahead than the United States has come as far as dealing with the legal issue of polygamy. Would you explain the polygamy issues that are facing Canada at this time, and how this is fitting in? It just seems to be fitting in so well with your own paper.
Well, there was recently, I believe it was January or February, I can't remember the exact month, but it was 2009 that 2 polygamists from an area in southern British Columbia, which is a province on the west coast of Canada, near Creston, British Columbia, 2 men from the community of Bountiful, which is the name of their polygamist committee, or community. Winston Blackmore and I forget the fellow,
James Oler.
James Oler. Forgot his first name, but James Oler were both charged not with abuse, but with practicing polygamy, because it is illegal in Canada as well, and has been since Confederation in 1867. So, but what they did is finally found a prosecutor who would prosecute them on the grounds that they were practicing something illegally.
Right.
And I suppose the thing which most people don't know is that he was charged with that. Both of them were charged with that. And in October of 2009, so just 10 months later, all charges were dismissed.
Right.
And under the, I guess you could call it the loophole, that they had gone out looking for a prosecutor who would actually prosecute. So they said that they had gone out sort of headhunting.
Yeah.
That's the impression I get. I certainly haven't read all the legal documents. And so because that has now been dismissed by the Supreme Court of Canada, what has happened just recently, just in the last few months, is Winston Blackmore is now suing the government of Canada for mental strain and for the Yeah, so
And
he is now suing Canada.
He's a very bold man. He demanded all payment for all of his legal fees while he was being charged.
And he doesn't deny being a polygamist, and he doesn't deny having, I believe it's approximately 26 wives and 100 children. He does not deny that.
Right. He doesn't.
No.
Absolutely does not. A part of what's going on in Canada is the debate of whether they should legalize it or decriminalize it, or I guess three choices, or keep it like it is.
Part of the debate going on in the U.S. as well, but it certainly is, and that's why the government has asked for more information, because the polygamists are asking for decriminalization, not legalization.
Would you explain what the decriminalization of polygamy is as opposed to legalizing polygamy?
Well, if you decriminalize polygamy, then they can't be put in jail because they're not doing anything criminal. They can't have their property seized. They can't be accused of doing anything illegal because it's not a criminal, it's not against the law, it's not a criminal act. So it wouldn't be seen as something worth pursuing because there's no criminality to it. Whereas if it were legalized, then there would be laws and rules and regulations that would be set up for just like any other law that has, that is implemented, and then they would have to follow those laws. And so there would be a lot more laws to follow, whereas with decriminalization, they probably can pretty well go about their business and do as they please.
And I can see why they would want that. Polygamists, well, even beginning way back with Joseph Smith, they believed, in fact, Brigham Young gave a speech where they're above the law. And so if they legalized it and then set laws and guidelines in place for the practice of polygamy, they would think they were above the law anyway, perhaps.
Well, there's certainly by overtly saying I practice polygamy and I have so many wives and so many children, and stating that so openly, it's like a challenge to do something about that. And because no one has ever, there has been no ever.
And I think that's what Winston Blackmore is doing. He's bold enough to challenge it.
Yes.
I just read from the Toronto Sun an article this week where it says the Green Party voted down a motion to push to decriminalize polygamy in Canada. They said 82% were against decriminalizing it and 18% were in favor. Now, this is not a final vote by any means, but this is just one of your parties up there.
And the Green Party would be like, 0.02% of the population of Canada.
It's interesting.
It's a very
to see
small
the
party.
way they're
or maybe 1%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They did mention that the speakers in the workshop were careful to define polygamy as a marriage between multiple spouses. And they made a clear distinction between polygamy between consenting as adults and a polygamous sect, which would be the Mormon-based polygamy sect in Bountiful, Canada. And as I read this, where they have been alleged to be involved in domestic abuse, and I don't know of polygamy yet that isn't, but Mormon-based polygamy groups, they're not dealing with, and this will be my next question to you as well, in your research, the women really don't have a choice. They, even if they're 18 or 19 when they get married, they really don't have an informed choice, because when they're born and raised with this brainwashing, do it or be damned, and they're never taught anything outside of the group that is viable. So even if they are of legal age, do they really have an informed choice?
Well, it is interesting that the women I have talked to make the choice that they're capable of making. And the informed choice would be that the only information they would have had, almost without exception, although there are always exceptions, but they would not have received any outside input into their lives of any kind under the sort of the Mormon polygamy, because they don't live normally, they don't live in any community where they can get other information, or they're not schooled. They're not given enough schooling to, and of course the books are all censored. And so where would they get define informed choice. Most of us would say informed so they can make a decision among many.
Where they can compare their choices and compare what's good or better or best.
Yes.
When you first began your research, Winston Blackmore had not yet been arrested, though,
No,
right?
he hadn't. But there had been much talk about how British Columbia, the government of British Columbia, was going to handle this, and they had a prosecutor who would not prosecute. So they went out and found one
who would, and that's why they quashed the charges.
And that is why it was squashed, because they feel like they went out headhunting for the right person. It's ironical because you think, well, to go out and find somebody who's, I don't know, brave enough? I don't know what the word would be. Somebody who believes in the law and will go and make sure this law is obeyed.
Maybe you made the remark that many Canadians don't realize that Winston Blackmore is the only polygamy group. He's not the only representative of polygamy, but he's the most visible, and so therefore they believe he's the only really one they're dealing with.
I would say most Canadians are aware that polygamy is an issue in the United States, recently an issue in Canada because of Winston Blackmore, and I think most of them believe that that's it, that there is this small community in British Columbia. Now, most Canadians do know that Canada is facing a number of families who are immigrating from Africa and from the Far East, where polygamy has had a long tradition of existence. And so they're thinking about what are we going to do about these families who are immigrating, who are already polygamous families from other countries.
So they've got some pretty intense issues that they are dealing with to try and determine what to do with this problem of polygamy. You also mentioned about the human trafficking that's taking place across the border with, and that's been an issue that even people in the United States are upset that nothing seems to be done about it, and it's going on much more frequently than we dream.
Well, now the really interesting thing about that is, think about it. If the group in Bountiful didn't have fresh blood, they're a very small group compared to how much polygamy there is existing in the United States. So if they didn't have fresh blood, they would be marrying brothers and sisters soon.
Which the Kingston group is doing.
Okay. And so in one of the interviews I did in this last week, one of the women who I spoke with actually said that when her father and when her entire family left the Bountiful area and moved to Colorado City, they were just welcomed with open arms because it was fresh blood.
Oh, isn't that disgusting?
And it was new sons and new daughters, to introduce a new line of a new family into the group. And so they were almost courted, she said. And they were just so nice to begin with, and everything just seemed so wonderful to begin with.
Yeah.
Because here was a group, a fairly large group. It was parents, grandparents, and kids who had all moved more or less within a short period of time. So.
Yeah. And the same is true where they would bring people from the Colorado City group up to the Blackmore group.
Yes,
and integrate them into their group too, as well, for the same reason. Well, let's get back to your research. You have been doing interviews, and that's one of the reasons that you're down here in this area at this time, because you wanted to interview women who had been in polygamy. Would you explain who are your main focus for your interviews and why?
Well, the main focus for the interviews are women, and actually I should maybe tell you the title of my research because it is revealing in what it is I'm looking for. The title is called Transition and Identity, Women's Experience of Leaving Polygamy. So I'm very careful to explain to the women that I talk to ahead of time is the story of their experience in polygamy. Of course, that's important to to telling any story, that that's their life, they lived it. But there's so many women out there who are very afraid of being identified, not for themselves so much, but if they happen to have a daughter or a sister or a child or a parent who is still in polygamy, then if they are identified, they know that their relatives will receive some kind of punishment.
Right.
And what I've been told, very abusive. They'll be treated very badly.
That's true.
So what I am actually talking to these women about is their transition. How did they find the ability? What resources were there? How did they get out? And then what was their transition like? And we end up talking about the length of time it takes to transition. And who are they now compared to that? We all have identities. We say, well, this is who I am. And most of us have role models to choose from and say, oh, I'd like to be more like her, or her, and she's a school teacher, or she's an engineer, or she has her own business. But women coming out of polygamy have very few role models. Right. They have one, which is generally one role model, which is women are to marry, produce children, and their role is to do the things that are associated with that.
Serve their husband, serve the priesthood.
So my question is around how, when you come out, how do you find who you want to be? Who that question, who am I?
Yeah. And you wanted to interview women who have been out long enough so that they would have more of an objective viewpoint on their experience?
Well, we know as psychologists, as therapists, that if you leave any marriage, any relationship, or something that is really, really important to you, it takes time for you to emotionally heal, to move forward with your life and begin to develop who you want to be or who you would like to become. So,
or even find out who you want to become. In my case,
there's a lot of exploration to be done.
Yeah.
It's like, who am I? Okay, well, maybe it's this, and no, that wasn't it. Maybe it's this. And so there's a lot of exploration to be done, and there's a lot of emotional work to be done out of polygamy. I'm just finding just how much longer it seems to be taking women to do their emotional work, to get stable, and by stability I mean just a sense of, I can do this, I can stay out, I'll be okay, I won't be going to hell. And the two biggest fears I've been finding are, number one, I'm going to go to hell if I come out, and the second one is I will lose my family.
Right.
So to get through those first couple of years, I don't have a definite set amount of time, but it's definitely around 2 years that they would have left polygamy.
Without violating any confidential issues, can you discuss some of the most surprising responses that you've encountered, that you've gathered from some of your interviews?
Well, I can tell you a few things that have surprised me that aren't specific. And one of the surprises is it seems like most of the women who get out take many, many, many years to work through this idea that they are not going to go to hell. It seems to be, I didn't realize that it would be so ingrained that leaving would be, that would be like almost the number one concern. It's right along there with, I will lose my family. But it seems that most women who do leave have family on the outside who often will help them in some way. Yes.
Yeah.
So
I think now that would be more prevalent now than say when I left. There would be more people out because there's been more years for people to leave and be able to. When I left, I didn't know of anyone that could help me.
And I think that's probably true. And I have heard that there are changes since the whole issue, the legal issue with Warren Jeffs. What I am hearing is that things are changing.
Out of necessity and for no other reason. Legal necessity.
Well, legal necessity, and the people, it seems like the women within polygamy are talking amongst themselves a little more, and so they just say, yes, things are changing, we just don't know what's changing or how it's changing. We just notice a difference.
And that's good if it's bringing good changes. But if the changes aren't something that, if they do it for fear of the law, they make those changes for fear of the law, they can't be permanent. They would have to be changes that make a permanent
These are changes
long-term.
amongst, it seems, what I've heard is amongst the members themselves.
That's good.
You know, the outside contact is allowed more.
Yeah.
And that kind of thing. So
that's good.
Yeah.
What about the free agency women? We know this culture, Mormon culture, polygamy culture, all the same thing, preaches, pontificates on free agency. Yet when someone tries to practice that free agency, they are shunned. They have huge repercussions. Have you got some information on that?
Well, I actually brought something that when I read it, it was like, oh my gosh, they're talking about my journey. So I can tell you a little bit about this piece I read, and it was in a psychological journal. Someone had a feminist writer had written about do people really know if they have free choice? And it was about, do women, I'll give a little background. Her topic was around, do we have essential parts of our nature? And are men and women, I don't know if you've heard of the book, Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus?
I've heard of it, yes. Okay. I haven't read it, but I've heard of it.
So if you think along those lines, an essentialist view would be that men are from Mars and women are from Venus, and that we act totally different because of our gender. Where there's another point of view that says maybe we're a lot more similar than different, and that the differences aren't innate, that they're socially learned. And so one of the examples I often use when people say to me something about, well, you know, extol the virtues of women, I talk about when slavery, and I don't even pretend to know a lot about this topic, but a little bit about it, because Canadians, by the way, study American history as well as Canadian history. So we know a fair amount, or we've learned a fair amount about the slaves and the Civil War.